Hello people! In this lecture we're going to be learning how we can create snow. So I've got this scene ready for us, and it's basically just a box with some floor generator for the facades. Obviously some voids too for the windows, and a couple of items such as this electrical box that I've got from Quixel. Then I have the structures, which is basically just beams with an eye-shaped geometry, and that's pretty much it. So now let's go into the topic of creating snow. So first of all, we need to create a plane to obviously start modeling our terrain. So let's go to our creation tab and now plane. Now what I want to do is to create a slope on this plane. So I'm going to right click and convert it to an edit poly. And you can see that we haven't got rid of our segments here. So let's delete it and create another plane. Remember to go into the parameters and set the length and width to 1. Right click and convert this to an edit poly. So I'm going to pick both of these edges and connect them once. And now to create that slope, we already know how to do that. I'll just use the vertices from the left side, and with my gizmo I'm going to bring them down. The same thing with this one. So if I go to a lateral view, or in this case a front view, you can see how I'm creating this type of angle on our terrain. Notice where the structure is, so I need to create this just underneath these, pretty much like this. Okay, so now we're ready. Now one thing that we need to know is that snow needs a lot of polygons, so we need a very dense mesh. We already know how to do this. We are going to go into our edit geometry tab, and here we have the mesh smooth. So if we just press multiple times, we will start populating the plane. So again, mesh smooth, and that's going to be enough. So obviously we don't need all of these polygons. We only need to have the ones that are going to be inside our camera range. So because of this, I'm going to delete all of these polygons. I'm going to pick this side and then this side, just like we did with our last terrain. This is going to be okay for now. Now let's go into our viewport of our camera. Okay, so we're just checking that everything is fine. And now let's start modeling with our paint deformation tools. Again, we need this many polygons because snow actually has a certain design to it, if you will. Okay, so now let's go to our paint deformation and let's pick our push and pull. Also, we need the brush size to be around 200 centimeters. In this case, and the push and pull value, we can make it a little bit higher. So let's go to 40 centimeters and let's see if this is going to be working out. All right, so as you can see, this is actually way lower because when we use the mesh smooth, our plane actually got some curvature on it. So let's go ahead and pick an FFD 4x4 and let's go to a front view, and you can see what happened here. We would have never reached the structure like this. Before this, let's actually Ctrl-Z everything and now apply the FFD 4x4. Let's go to our front view and let's pick the control points from our tool and move all of this like so until we touch this structure again. Okay, now that we've done that, let's right click and convert this to an edit poly once again. Let's select all of the elements, and again, let's go inside our paint deformation tab and use our push and pull tool. Now let's set our values, 200 centimeters, and this is going to be 20 centimeters for push value. This looks much better. So one thing to keep in mind is that in our foreground, we actually need to create a little bit more detail, just like we did in the last time. So the snow modeling, it's a little bit smoother than the rest of the ground that we've modeled. So for this, we're going to be using the relax tool in a bit. So first of all, again, we need to add detail to our foreground. So if I go to my viewport, you can see that this is way too high. So remember that by pressing the Alt key, we can get rid of this. And I think we're going to be needing more polygons. So let's go up here and set more polygons on our geometry tab. So mesh smooth once again, and there we go, much better. So yes, modeling snow does take a little bit of a toll on your PC. So be careful with that. Also, make sure that you're only using the polygons that are inside your camera range. So I can actually delete more of my terrain here, but I'm going to do that later. Let's keep on modeling this. So what I want to do is just to create some kind of path that's going towards this design on my left side. So I'm just pressing my Alt key to push that bit. And let's just keep pulling our rest of the terrain there. So in some parts, in some areas, I want to create a bit more snow as if it was accumulated. Okay, so it has to be a little bit irregular, but don't overdo it because then it's going to look a bit weird. We also have cases in which the snow is just really flat. And in those cases, we're just going to apply the material to it. But because we're learning how to create a complex snow terrain, we're going through all of this. Okay, just a little bit more detail. And we also need a bit more modeling over here, so I can actually go and add a higher value to my brush. Okay, make sure to be covering some of the structure there so that it looks a bit more natural. And now here at the back. Okay, let's just increase the density of the snow, and also at the back here. And I'm also going to apply an FFD 4x4 at this point. So let's go ahead and do that. Again, front view, and I'm going to pick the control points from this top part here and elevate it like so. So that the snow starts to cover the back of my design there. Okay, now right click and convert to edit poly once again. We need to edit this part here because it's way too high. Let's once again go to our paint deformation tool and set its parameters. The push and pull value can be 40 at this point. And if you start to get this type of problems, like as if your vertices were collapsing, this means that your push and pull value is a bit too high. So let's go for 15. Okay, just a little bit softer. And we actually need to fix these parts in a bit by relaxing the whole polygon there. As you can see, this is a bit too rough for being snow. And the best way to go around it, again, is with our relax tool. Okay, so this is enough. Let's go and select our whole element. And once again, let's go to edit geometry and start relaxing all of this, so that we get this very smooth terrain. Again, relax. Now let's go into our viewport, and you can see that we've overdid it here. So we need to lower this bit all the way to push and pull again. And let's lower all of this. There we go. This bit here, it's a bit too tall. Okay, so this is more than enough. We have our foreground done, and actually just a tiny bit more detail here. Maybe a path going up. So Alt to do that. Make sure that you're looking at your viewport to see what you're actually doing. Now let's add another layer of relax. Let's go into our viewport, and you can see that we've created something like this. So it's a very dense, snowy terrain. Now we need to add some light. So let's go inside our material editor and let's call in a corona sky. Okay, let's bring the corona sky here, and obviously we need to plug this into our environment. So let's go into our scene, and inside single map, we're going to be linking this component. Instance it, Another thing that we need to be careful when doing a snowy scene is our lighting. So when using a corona sky or an HDRI, sometimes it's not going to be enough. We're going to be needing also the help of the sun so that some of that snow detail will come up. Let's take that into account. Now we need to create a sun. So let's go into the creation tab, light and corona sun. My sun is going to be hidden from the left side. Let's just keep it something like this. Now let's go inside our sun parameters. And we know that the intensity is too high at 1, so I've placed 0.2. Also, we need to make sure that our corona sky is around 0.12. We can even go to 0.15 and start from there. Now let's go ahead and apply a snow texture to this. Now the workflow for a snowy texture is going to be pretty much the same for almost every material out there. In my case, I've got one from Quixel Bridge, but you can go ahead and get one from textures.com or the usual websites. So let's go into their material editor, and here's my snow material. So it's a very basic material, one that we've developed throughout the course. So this is not new for us. First of all, I have the ambient occlusion mixed with the albedo, then our roughness as usual, the specular, the corona normal, and finally the displacement. Now let's pick our plane, right click and assign material to selection. Now I'm going to use a UVW map just to start off our mapping, and this is not going to be our base map. We're going to be changing it in a bit. Let's use the box, or where planar we could also use it because it's just a surface, and I'm going to type in 500 centimeters by 500 centimeters in this case. Okay, now let's see our interactive render. So let's go into our render setup, scene, and start interactive. Alright, so here we are. You can see that we have many issues here. First of all, we notice that the surface is breaking at the left side here, and also the snow doesn't have any detail at all. And that's because most of our ground textures, such as a forest ground or in this case snow material, they do need very high values for the displacement. And again, this is not just for this case, but it's usually something that you're going to be finding throughout your professional archviz life. So now let's go back into our material editor, and if I select my corona physical material containing my snow texture, obviously, we see that the displacement is very low. So I'm going to start off with -50 for the minimum level and 50 for the maximum level. Remember that this is true for most ground textures. So if you're creating something like sand or maybe a rocky ground, take this into account. Now these values are not standard. You have to just keep trying different values that will match your scene. So let's start with this. Now let's go into our Start Interactive again. And now you can see that this is looking much better. However, we have some burned parts, even though in my tone mapping, I have my highlight compression at 3.5. But I don't want to go higher than this because it takes away the realism from my scene. Another thing that you should do is that in our white balance, when you're creating this type of cold scenes, make sure to have this at around 5000 to take away that warm look that our rendering might have, because we're actually creating some cold looking scenes, right? Okay, so now let's try and fix this part over here. And let's see what's going on. So we actually need to keep on relaxing this a little bit more so that we take away all of those bits, or we could add more polygons instead of doing that. So let's go into our edit poly and now mesh smooth. Okay, obviously this is getting quite heavy because of the amount of polygons that I have. You can see that we're up to 1 million now. So it's time to delete some of them. Let's go into a different view, and you can see that all of these polygons over here are actually not needed. Make sure that you're not deleting something that appears in our scene. This bit over here too. And we don't need all of this neither. One more layer of relax will do. So let's go into our geometry tab and relax. And our sun, it's a bit too strong, so the intensity we can lower it to 0.15. Also, our corona sky could be creating that burnt section there. So let's just grab it and let's say that the intensity it's only going to be at 0.1. Okay, now let's go back and start our interactive render again. Okay, so this is looking very good. We can actually just go into a 4 in our highlight compression, and our simple exposure we can lower it to 0.5, and we could also lower the intensity of the sun just to get rid of this part here that it's really bright. So let's go to our sun and 0.1. Okay, let's go back and into our scene, start interactive. Alright, so there we go. This is looking very good. However, if we find ourselves having a really plain surface with no terrain modeling, we're going to have to adjust our material. So why is this? Because the mapping is going to look a little bit off. So let's just create another plane. Okay, right click and convert this to an edit poly, and I'm going to bring in my texture to this one, assign material to selection. Okay, so now we have to add a mapping to this, and 500 by 500. And let's start the interactive render. Okay, so we can immediately see that this is not realistic at all. First of all, because we don't have a terrain modeled, and it's something that you always have to do when modeling any type of ground. But we also need to create randomness so that we can get closer to reality. And for this, we need to go to our material. So just like we did with our wooden boards for our floor, we're going to be bringing in a Corona UVW randomizer. Okay, so down here we have the tiling, and you can see that there's an option called randomize each tile. So let's check it, and in here we will see the number of tiles that we want to have. Also, the blending. So a simple setting for this, it's just going to be the rotation. So I want to have a random rotation from 0 degrees to 360 degrees. So that's going to generate a global random tiling, just like we did with chaos scatter. So we need to link all of these textures that we have here with our Corona UVW mapping. Also, the blending, I don't want it to be at 25%. So in here, 0 is 0% and 1 is 100%. So let's type in 1 in here. I'm going to move all of these textures over here and now link this one with all of them like so. So for this, I'm going to just copy this map several times to cover all of these textures. Let's go to our normal map and finally our displacement. Okay, now let's start the interactive render again. And as you can see, we can no longer see the tiling. And if we go inside our Corona UVW map here, and let's say that I want to have this texture a little bit more compact on my plane, just like in our noise component, I'll increase the number of tilings, let's say to 2 in this case, and you can see how the detail comes together a little bit more. And I can go for number 3, okay, but make sure that you're actually changing the parameters of the tiling to each one of our components. So let's go ahead and change all of them. Okay, so if you have a very plain surface, remember that it doesn't matter how flat your surface is, you will always need to model your terrain a little bit to bring in that realism. So now let's go back to our camera, so C for camera, and start the interactive render with this one to see the results. Okay, so now you can see how much detail we've brought in, and this is looking a little bit too much. So lowering the tiling will fix this. So let's go back to our Corona UVW randomizer and lift this at 1. corona normal, and finally our displacement. Okay, let's start the interactive render once again. And we could also fix this mountains of snow that we have here. They're looking a little bit odd. So let's go back and select our geometry or element here. And let me just see which ones they are. So let's go to our push and pull values. Okay, and let's just reduce this a little bit. They're way too high. Okay, and now let's go back. And this bit right here, we actually need to relax it. So let's go to our top view, and we're only going to be selecting this part. Let's go to our polygon option, and up here we have the select object tool. I'm just going to select this section, and I'm going to go up here to our relax option. Let's just click it multiple times. And there we go, it's fixed. Now let's go back to our interactive rendering. And there it is, everyone. So remember, first of all, we need a high value of displacement. The second thing that we have to take into consideration is our mapping. So sometimes it's not going to be enough to model the terrain. We also need to play around with the mapping using UVW randomizer. Also, as you can see, snow really needs lots of polygons in order to work properly. So be careful with that. Now, if you want to keep adding detail to this, you can add more 3D assets. So if I go to Quixel Bridge, for example, I have this snow embankment, these two. So I could just export them and scatter them on our terrain. So I highly recommend using Quixel so you can just export this type of 3D assets. But now you know how to create snowy scenes. Thanks as always. I'll see you in the next one.